In Spain, an autonomous community is a first-level political and administrative division, created in accordance with the Spanish Constitution of 1978, with the aim of guaranteeing limited autonomy of the nationalities and regions that comprise the Spanish nation, since sovereignty resides in the nation as a whole, represented in the central institutions of government, not in the communities. Spain is not a federation, but a highly decentralized unitary state that has asymmetrically devolved power to the communities, which, in turn, exercise the right to self-government within the limits set forth in the Constitution and their autonomous statutes. Some scholars have referred to the resulting system as a federal system in all but name, or a federation without federalism. There are 17 autonomous communities and 2 autonomous cities that are collectively known as autonomies. The 2 autonomous cities have the right to become autonomous communities, but neither has yet used this right. This unique framework of territorial administration is known as the state of autonomies. The autonomous communities are governed according to the Constitution and their own organic laws known as statutes of autonomy, which contain all the competences that they assume. Since devolution was intended to be asymmetrical in nature, the scope of competences vary for each community, but all have the same parliamentary structure. Autonomous communities. Autonomous cities. History. Background. Spain is a diverse country made up of different regions with varying economic and social structures, as well as different languages and historical, political and cultural traditions. While the entire Spanish territory was united under one crown by the 16th century, this was not a process of national homogenization or amalgamation. The constituent territories, be it crowns, kingdoms, principalities or dominions, retained much of the former institutional existence, including limited legislative, judicial or fiscal autonomy. These territories also exhibited a variety of customs, laws, languages and currencies until the mid-19th century. For the 18th century onwards, the Bourbon kings and the government tried to establish a more centralized regime. Leading figures of the Spanish Enlightenment advocated for the building of a Spanish nation beyond the internal territorial boundaries. However, unlike in other European countries such as France, where regional languages were spoken in rural areas or less developed regions, 2 important regional languages of Spain were spoken in some of the most industrialized areas, which, moreover, enjoyed higher levels of prosperity, in addition to having their own cultures and historical consciousness. These were the Basque Country and Catalonia. This gave rise to peripheral nationalisms along with Spanish nationalism. Therefore, economic and social changes that had produced a national cultural unification in France had the opposite effect in Spain. As such, Spanish history since the late 19th century has been shaped by a dialectical struggle between Spanish nationalism and peripheral nationalisms, mostly in Catalonia and the Basque Country, and to a lesser degree in Galicia. In a response to Catalan demands, limited autonomy was granted to Catalonia in 1913, abolished in 1920, and granted again in 1932 during the Second Spanish Republic, when the Generalitat, Catalonia's medieval institution of government, was restored. The Constitution of 1931 envisaged a territorial division for all Spain in autonomous regions, which was never fully attained. Only Catalonia, the Basque Country and Galicia had approved statutes of autonomy, the process being thwarted by the Spanish Civil War that broke out in 1936, and the victory of the rebel national forces under Francisco Franco. During General Franco's dictatorial regime, centralism was most forcefully enforced as a way of preserving the unity of the Spanish nation. nation. Peripheral nationalism, along with communism and atheism, were regarded by his regime as the main threats. His attempts to fight separatism with heavy-handed but sporadic repression, and his often severe suppression of language and regional identities backfired. The demands for democracy became intertwined with demands for the recognition of a pluralistic vision of the Spanish nationhood. When Franco died in 1975, Spain entered into a phase of transition towards democracy. The most difficult task of the newly democratically elected Cortes Generales in 1977, acting as a constituent assembly, was to transition from a unitary centralized state into a decentralized state in a way that would satisfy the demands of the peripheral nationalists. The then Prime Minister of Spain, Adolfo Suárez, met with Josep Tarradellas, President of the Generalitat of Catalonia, in exile. An agreement was made so that the Generalitat would be restored and limited competencies would be transferred while the constitution was still being written. Shortly after, the government allowed the creation of assemblies of members of parliament integrated by deputies and senators of the different territories of Spain, so that they could constitute pre-autonomic regimes for the regions as well. The so-called fathers of the constitution had to strike a balance between the opposing views of Spain on the one hand, the centralist view inherited from Franco's regime, and on the other hand federalism and a pluralistic view of Spain as a nation of nations, between the uniform decentralization of entities with the same competencies and an asymmetrical structure that would distinguish the nationalities. Peripheral nationalist parties wanted a multinational state with a federal or confederal model, whereas the governing union of the Democratic Center and the People's Alliance wanted minimum decentralization. The Spanish Socialist Workers' Party was sympathetic to a federal system. In the end, the Constitution, published and ratified in 1979, found a balance in recognizing the existence of nationalities and regions in Spain, within the indissoluble unity of the Spanish nation. In order to manage the tensions present in the Spanish transition to democracy, the drafters of the current Spanish constitution avoided giving labels such as federal to the territorial arrangements, while enshrining in the constitution the right to autonomy as self-government of the nationalities and regions. Through process of asymmetric devolution of power to the autonomous communities that were to be created. Constitution of 1978. The starting point in the territorial organization of Spain was the second article of the Constitution, which reads, "The Constitution is based on the indissoluble unity of the Spanish nation, the common and indivisible homeland of all Spaniards. It recognizes and guarantees the right to self-government of the nationalities and regions of which it is composed and the solidarity among them all." The Constitution was rather ambiguous on how this was to take place. It does not define, detail, or impose the structure of the state. It does not tell the difference between nation and nationality, and it does not specify which are the nationalities and which are the regions, or the territories they comprise. Rather than imposing, it enables a process towards a decentralized structure based on the exercise that these nationalities and regions would make of the right to self-government that they were granted. As such, the outcome of this exercise was not predictable and its construction was deliberately open-ended. The Constitution only created a process for an eventual devolution, but it was voluntary in nature. The nationalities and regions themselves had the option of choosing to attain self-government or not. In order to exercise this right, the Constitution established an open process process whereby the nationalities and regions could be constituted as autonomous communities. First, it recognized the pre-existing 50 provinces of Spain, a territorial division of the liberal centralizing regime of the 19th century created for purely administrative purposes. These provinces would serve as the building blocks and constituent parts of the autonomous communities. The Constitution stipulated that the following could be constituted as autonomous communities: 2 or more adjacent provinces with common historical, cultural and economic characteristics. Insular territories, a single province with a historical regional identity. It also allowed for exceptions to the above criteria in that the Spanish Parliament could authorize, in the nation's interest, the constitution of an autonomous community even if it was a single province without a historical regional identity, authorize a grant autonomy to entities or territories that were not provinces. The Constitution also established 2 routes to accede to autonomy. The fast route, or fast track, also called the exception, was established in Article 151, and was implicitly reserved for the 3 historical nationalities, the Basque Country, Catalonia and Galicia, in that the very strict requirements to opt for this route were waived via the second transitory disposition for those territories that had approved a Statute of Autonomy during the Second Spanish Republic. The Constitution also explicitly established that the institutional framework for these communities would be a parliamentary system, with a legislative assembly elected by universal suffrage, a cabinet or council of government, a president of such a council, elected by the assembly, and a high court of justice. They were also granted a maximum level of devolved competencies. The slow route, or slow track, also called the norm, was established in Article 143. This route could be taken, via the first transitory disposition, by the pre-autonomic regimes that had been constituted in 1978, while the Constitution was still being drafted, if approved by 2/3 of all municipalities involved whose population would sum up to at least the majority of the electoral census of each province or insular territory. These communities would assume limited competences during a provisional period of 5 years, after which they could assume further competences, upon negotiation with the central government. However, the Constitution did not explicitly establish an institutional framework for these communities. They could have established a parliamentary system like the historical nationalities, or they could have not assumed any legislative powers and simply established mechanisms for the administration of the competencies they were granted. Once the autonomous communities were created, Article 145 prohibits the federation of autonomous communities. This was understood as any agreement between communities that would produce an alteration to the political and territorial equilibrium that would cause a confrontation between different blocks of communities, an action incompatible with the principle of solidarity and the unity of the nation. The so-called additional and transitory dispositions of the Constitution allowed for some exceptions to the above-mentioned framework. In terms of territorial organization, the fifth transitory disposition established that the cities of Ceuta and Melilla, Spanish exclaves located on the northern coast of Africa, could be constituted as autonomous communities if the absolute majority of the members of the city councils would agree on such a motion, and with the approval of the Spanish Parliament, which would exercise its prerogatives to grant autonomy to other entities besides provinces. In terms of the scope of competences, the first additional disposition recognized the historical rights of the charted territories. namely the Basque-speaking provinces, which were to be updated in accordance with the constitution. This recognition would allow them to establish a financial, chartered regime, whereby they would not only have independence to manage their own finances, like all other communities, but to have their own public financial ministries with the ability to levy and collect all taxes. In the rest of the communities, all taxes are levied and collected by for the central government and then redistributed among all. Autonomic Pacts. The statutes of autonomy of the Basque Country and Catalonia were sanctioned by the Spanish Parliament on the 18th of December 1979. The position of the party in government, the Union of the Democratic Centre, was that only the three historical nationalities would assume full competences, while the rest would accede to autonomy via Article 143, assuming fewer powers and perhaps not even establishing institutions of government. This was firmly opposed by the representatives of Andalusia, who demanded for the region the maximum level of competences granted to the nationalities. After a massive rally in support of autonomy, a referendum was organized for Andalusia to attain autonomy through the strict requirements of Article 151, or the fast route, with UCD calling for abstention, and the main party in opposition in Parliament, the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, calling for a vote in favor. These requirements were not met, as in one of the 8 provinces, Almeria. Votes in favor, although the majority, did not amount to half of the electoral census as required. Yet, in general, the results of the referendum had been clear and unequivocal. After several months of discussion, the then Prime Minister of Spain, Adolfo Suárez, and the leader of the opposition, Felipe González, reached an agreement to resolve the Andalusian issue, whereby the Parliament approved an amendment to the law that regulated referendums, and used the prerogative of Article 144c of the Constitution. Both actions, which combined, would allow Andalusia to take the fast route. They also agreed that no other region would take the fast route, but that all regions would establish a parliamentary system with all institutions of government. This opened a phase that was dubbed as Café para Todos, coffee for all. This agreement was eventually put into writing in July 1981 in what has been called the First Autonomic Pacts. These Autonomic Pacts filled in the gap left by the open character of the Constitution. Among other things, they described the final outline of the territorial division of Spain, with the specific number and name of the autonomous communities to be created. They restricted the fast route to the historical nationalities and Andalusia. All the rest had to take the slow route. They established that all autonomous communities would have institutions of government within a parliamentary system. They set up a deadline for all the remaining communities to be constituted, the 1st of February 1983. In the end, 17 autonomous communities were created: Andalusia, and the 3 historical nationalities, the Basque Country, Catalonia and Galicia, took the fast route, and assumed the maximum level of competences immediately. The rest took the slow route. Aragon, Castile-La Mancha, Castile and Leon, Extremadura and the Valencian community acceded to autonomy as communities integrated by 2 or more provinces with common historical, economic and cultural characteristics. The Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands acceded to autonomy as insular territories, the latter integrated by 2 provinces. Principality of Asturias, Cantabria, La Rioja and Murcia acceded to autonomy as single provinces with historical identity. Navarre, as a single province, acceded to autonomy through the recognition, update and improvement of its historical and local law, and as such, it is known as a chartered community. The province of Madrid was removed from Castile-La Mancha, to which it previously belonged, and constituted as a uni-provincial autonomous community as the capital of the nation with the name Community of Madrid. Special provisions were made for the Valencian community and the Canary Islands in that, although they took the slow route, through the subsequent approval of specific organic laws, they were to assume the maximum level of competences in less than 5 years, since they had started a process towards the fast route prior to the approval of the Autonomic Pacts. On the other hand, Cantabria and La Rioja, although originally part of Old Castile, and both originally included in the pre-autonomic regime of Castile and Leon, were granted autonomy as single provinces with historical identity, a move supported by the majority of the populations. The Autonomic Pacts give both Cantabria and La Rioja the option of being incorporated into Castile and Leon in the future, and required that the statutes of autonomy of all three communities include such a provision. Leon, a historical kingdom and historical region of Spain, once joined to Old Castile to form Castile and Leon, was denied secession to be constituted as an autonomous community on its own right. During the second half of the 1980s, the central government seemed reluctant to transfer all competences to the slow route communities. After the 5 years set up by the Constitution, all slow route communities demanded the maximum transfer guaranteed by the Constitution. This led to what has been called the Second Autonomic Pacts of 1992, between the then Prime Minister of Spain Felipe González from PSOE and the leader of the opposition, José María Aznar from the newly created People's Party, successor of the People's Alliance Party. Through these agreements, new competences were transferred, with the reforms to many statutes of autonomy of the slow route communities with the aim of equalizing them to the fast route communities. In 1995, the cities of Ceuta and Melilla were constituted as autonomous cities without legislative powers, but with an autonomous assembly not subordinated to any other province or community. The creation of the autonomous communities was a diverse process that started with the Constitution, was normalized with the Autonomic Pacts, and was completed with the Statutes of Autonomy. It is, however, an ongoing process. Further devolution, or even the return of transferred competences, is always a possibility. This has been evidenced in the 2000s, at the beginning with a wave of approval of new statutes of autonomy for many communities, and more recently with many considering the re-centralization of some competences in the wake of the economic and financial crisis of 2008. Nonetheless, Spain is now a highly decentralized country with a structure unlike any other, similar but not equal to a federation, even though in many respects the country can be compared to countries which are undeniably federal. The unique resulting system is referred to as autonomous state, or more precisely, state of autonomies. Current state of affairs. Overview. By means of the state of autonomies implemented after the Spanish Constitution of 1978, Spain has been quoted to be remarkable for the extent of the powers peacefully devolved over the past 30 years, and an extraordinarily decentralized country, with the central government accounting for just 18% of public spending, 38% for the regional governments, 13% for the local councils, and the remaining 31% for the social security system. In terms of personnel, by 2010 almost 1,350,000 people, or 50.3% of the total civil servants in Spain, were employed by the autonomous communities. City and provincial councils accounted for 23.6%, and those employees working for the central administration represented 22.2% of the total. tensions within the system. Peripheral nationalism continues to play a key role in Spanish politics. Some peripheral nationalists view that there is a vanishing practical distinction between the terms nationalities and regions, as more competences are transferred to all communities in roughly the same degree, and as other communities have chosen to identify themselves as nationalities. In fact, it has been argued that the establishment of the state of autonomies has led to the creation of new regional identities and invented communities. Many in Galicia, the Basque Country, and Catalonia still viewed the communities as nations, not just nationalities, and Spain as a plurinational state, or a nation of nations, and they have made demands for further devolution of succession. In 2004, the Basque Parliament approved the Balearic Plan, whereby the Basque Country would approve a new statute of autonomy containing key provisions such as shared sovereignty with Spain, full independence of the judiciary, and the right to self-determination, and assuming all competences except that of the Spanish nationality law, defense, and monetary policy. The plan was rejected by the Spanish Parliament in 2005, and the situation has remained largely stable in that front so far. The severe economic crisis in Spain that started in 2008 produced different reactions in the different communities. On one hand, some began to consider a return of some responsibilities to the central government, while, on the other hand, in Catalonia, debate on the fiscal deficit, Catalonia being one of the largest net contributors in taxes, led many who are not necessarily separatist, but who are enraged by the financial deficit to support secession. In September 2012, Artur Mas, then Catalonia's president, requested from the central government a new fiscal agreement, with the possibility of giving his community powers equal to those of the communities of chartered regime, but Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy refused. Mas dissolved the Catalan parliament, called for new elections, and promised to celebrate a referendum on independence within the next 4 years. Rajoy's government declared that they would use all legal instruments. Current legislation requires the central executive government of the Congress of Deputies to call for a sanction-binding referendum to block any such attempt. The Spanish Socialist Workers' Party and its counterpart in Catalonia proposed to reopen the debate on the territorial organization of Spain, changing the constitution to create a true federal system to better reflect the singularities of Catalonia, as well as to modify the current taxation system. One scholar summarizes the current situation as follows: the autonomous state appears to have come full circle, with reproaches from all sides. According to some, it has not gone far enough and has failed to satisfy their aspirations for improved self-government. For others, it has gone too far, fostering inefficiency or reprehensible linguistic policies.